She's 30, fat, and unwanted. The words landed in the employment office like a verdict, spoken loudly enough that the clerk by the window and the two men waiting for ranch hands both heard them. Laughter followed, soft, careless, the kind that didn't bother to hide its cruelty. Josephine Brennan kept her eyes on the scarred wooden floor. At nearly 300 pounds, she had learned long ago that looking up only invited more commentary. Her body had always entered a room before her did, announcing her presence like an offense. Too wide, too slow, too old. In Helena, Montana, where women were valued for youth, beauty, and the promise of marriage, she had failed every category by the time she turned 30. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, uncomfortable but not enough to intervene. "Now, gentlemen, that's hardly—" "It's true," Joe said calmly. The laughter stopped. Whitmore blinked. "Miss Brennan?" "It's true," she repeated, lifting her head at last. Her voice was steady, practiced. "I'm 30. I'm fat. And no one wants me, which is why I'm here asking for work instead of pretending a miracle husband is going to appear." Silence settled, thick and awkward. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Miss Brennan, I admire your honesty, but positions are limited. Families want young women, agile women, women who won't, how shall I put this, draw comment." Joe smiled thinly. "I've drawn comment my entire life. It hasn't killed me yet." That was when the door opened. Cold mountain air rushed in, followed by a man who seemed to bring the wilderness with him. He was tall, unnaturally so, broad through the shoulders, dressed in buckskin darkened by weather and time. His beard was thick, his hair tied back, and a long scar cut down the side of his face, pale against sun-darkened skin. Conversation died instantly. He did not look at the men who had laughed. He did not look at Whitmore. His eyes settled on Joe. Not her body, her. "You the woman they're mocking?" he asked. Joe swallowed. "Yes." "Good." He turned to Whitmore. "I need a housekeeper, someone permanent, someone who won't run off when the snow comes." Whitmore hesitated. "Mr. Wolf, this position is remote, difficult. I hesitate to recommend—" "I didn't ask who you'd recommend," the man cut in. "I asked if she wants the job." Joe felt every eye in the room burn into her. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Hard," he said simply. "Cooking, managing the cabin, isolation, silence, no neighbors, no courting, no nonsense." "That sounds perfect," Joe replied without hesitation. The men by the window snorted. "You sure about that mountain man?" one of them said. "She won't last a week." The stranger turned slowly. "Perfect," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's exactly what I need." He looked back at Joe. "If you want the job, pack what you own. We leave tomorrow." At Joe's heart pounded, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. For the first time in her life, someone hadn't dismissed her as a problem. He had chosen her. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. And if this story touches you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Now, let's get back to the story. Wolf's Ridge lay far beyond anything Joe had ever known. The wagon ride lasted 2 days, climbing steadily into the Rockies, until the world narrowed to pine, stone, and Scott. The freighter who delivered her spoke little, but he cast her curious glances now and then as if trying to decide whether she would last a week or a winter. Cyrus Wolf rode ahead on horseback, never once looking back to see if she followed. Joe appreciated that more than she could explain. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked less like a home and more like a statement. Solid logs, tightly fitted, a stone chimney blackened by years of smoke, drying racks heavy with pelts, nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. "This is where I live," Cyrus said, dismounting. "Rules are simple. I leave before dawn. I come back at dusk. I don't talk much. You don't rearrange my tools without asking." Joe nodded. "Understood." "You'll have your own room, door locks from the inside." He paused, then added gruffly, "No one will bother you here." The words settled into her bones. No one will bother you. Her first nights were quiet to the point of unease. No saloon noise, no boarding house whispers, no men commenting on her plate or her body, just wind, fire, and the steady rhythm of work. Joe rose with the sun and learned the cabin's needs by feel. She cooked simple meals, cleaned without disturbing his system, repaired clothing worn thin by wilderness use. Cyrus ate what she prepared without comment, but his plate was always empty by the end. Sometimes that felt like praise. He brought back extra meat and left it where she could reach it easily. He fixed the latch on her door the second night without mentioning it. He built a small washing shed behind the cabin so she wouldn't have to bathe in the open creek. None of it came with thanks. All of it came with intention. They spoke rarely. "Storm coming? I'll finish the laundry today." "Good." Silence filled the rest, and Joe found that she thrived in it. For the first time in years, her worth wasn't measured by smiles or approval. It was measured by meals eaten, floors swept, supplies organized, days that ended with everything still standing. 6 weeks in, Cyrus came home limping. Joe noticed immediately. "You're injured." "It'll pass. Sit," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. He hesitated, then obeyed. The ankle was swollen, angry, unmistakably damaged. "You can't walk on that," Joe said. "You'll make it worse." "I have traps to check." "Then teach me." He stared at her. She met his gaze without flinching. "You chose me because you thought I was strong enough. Let me prove you right." For a long moment the only sound was the fire popping. Then Cyrus nodded. "Fine." He taught her carefully, precisely. No wasted words. Joe listened like her life depended on it, because out here it did. When she returned 2 days later, scratched, exhausted and triumphant, Cyrus stood on the porch. "You didn't quit," he said. Joe smiled faintly. "You didn't hire a quitter." Something shifted then, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Trust does not grow from grand gestures. It grows in quiet exchanges, in shared labor. In the moment, someone is allowed to carry what was once carried alone. That night, as Cyrus bandaged her scratched hand with surprising gentleness, Joe realized something that made her chest ache. For the first time in her life, she was not unwanted. She was necessary. Winter did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, the way cold truths often do, first in the sharper mornings, then in the way the creek skimmed with ice before noon, and finally in the hush that settled over Wolf's Ridge when snow erased the last faint tracks of the outside world. Joe adapted. Not gracefully, not quickly, but relentlessly. Her body ached in places she had never used before. Her breath came short on climbs that Cyrus barely noticed. But she learned how to pace herself, how to carry weight without fighting it, how to let endurance do what speed never could. She learned the mountains the way she had once learned rejection, by repetition. Cyrus watched. He never hovered, never corrected, unless it mattered. When he did speak, it was precise. "Don't rush that slope. Wind'll turn by dusk. Rest before you push again." And Joe listened, not because he was her employer, but because he had never once spoken to her like she was foolish. They ate together at the table each evening, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a few exchanged words about weather or work. Once, unexpectedly, Cyrus asked her about Helena. "What made you stay so long?" he said, eyes on his plate. Joe considered the question. "Hope," she said finally, "and the fear of having none." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. One night, while Joe mended a tear in his coat, she noticed his hands trembling slightly as he sharpened his knife. "The cold?" she asked. "Old injury," he replied. Then, after a pause, "Grizzly." She waited. "5 years back," he continued, voice flat. "Thought I was dead. Sometimes wish I'd been." Joe's needle stilled. Instead of responding with sympathy or shock, she said simply, "I'm glad you weren't." He looked at her, then really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Most people aren't," he said. "I am." The words hung between them, fragile and undeniable. Later that week, snow trapped them for a full day. Joe baked bread with the last of the yeast, filling the cabin with warmth and scent. Cyrus read by the fire, occasionally glancing up as if to confirm she was still there. When she handed him the first slice, he hesitated. "You eat first," he said. "I'm fine." "So am I." He pushed the plate back toward her. "You worked harder today." No one had ever noticed that before. Sometimes healing begins not with tenderness, but with fairness, with the quiet dignity of being seen without being judged. And in that space, something long frozen begins to loosen its grip. By the time the first heavy snow fell, Joe no longer counted the days. Wolf's Ridge was no longer exile. It was rhythm. It was purpose. It was the steady knowledge that when Cyrus left at dawn, he would return at dusk, and that she would be there when he did. And Cyrus, who had chosen isolation to escape the world's gaze, found himself listening for the sound of her humming as proof that he was no longer alone. Neither spoke of what was forming, but both felt it. By the time winter settled fully over Wolf's Ridge, the cabin no longer felt like a refuge from the world. It felt like a life. Snow pressed against the windows in thick, quiet layers. The wind tested every seam of the walls, but the fire held, steady and loyal. Joe learned how to bank it at night so embers would survive until morning, how to coax flame back without wasting precious wood. Cyrus never commented, but when the fire greeted him warm after a dawn return, he paused every time, just long enough for her to notice. Mornings developed a rhythm. Joe rose first. She moved carefully so the floor wouldn't creak beneath her weight, an old habit she had never fully unlearned, though Cyrus had never once complained. She put on coffee, sliced bread, set out whatever meat he'd brought in the night before. When he came in from the cold, she handed him a cup without a word. Some days he nodded. Some days he said her name. That was enough. She took pride in the small things, in how the cabin slowly changed under her hands. Curtains cut from worn blankets softened the sharp angles of the walls. Shelves were reorganized so nothing fell when the wind rattled the place. A corner of the room became hers, not just a bedroom, but a space that held her sewing kit, her books, her small, stubborn claims to selfhood. Cyrus noticed everything, even when he pretended not to. One evening he came in carrying an armload of firewood and stopped short. "You moved the table." "Only a foot," Joe said, bracing for irritation. "The light's better there, easier to mend." He studied it, then set the wood down. "It is." That was all he said. Another time, she found a new pair of gloves folded beside her coat. Thicker leather, lined, no comment, no explanation. They fit perfectly. Their conversations grew, not longer, but deeper. They spoke of practical things first, weather, supplies, traps. Then, slowly, other things crept in. "What were you before Helena?" Cyrus asked one night. Joe smiled faintly. "Invisible." He frowned. "That's not a job." "It's a role," she said, "one I was very good at." He considered that in silence. "You don't have to be that here." "I know," she replied, and she meant it. The nights were the hardest. The cabin was small, the wind loud. Memories had room to roam. Joe sometimes woke gasping, dreams filled with boarding house rooms and whispered insults and doors closing. When that happened, she would sit by the fire until her breathing slowed. More than once, she found Cyrus already awake, staring into the flames. "You too?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Sleep's unreliable." She sat beside him, not touching, just present. They learned the shape of each other's silences, the way some people learn conversation. Healing came in pieces, in the way Cyrus always let Joe eat first, without making it a rule. In the way Joe learned which days his scar pulled tight and left him irritable, and which days to let him be. In the way he built her a separate bed at first, then, without comment, moved it closer to the fire when the cold worsened. One night, while mending his coat, Joe said without thinking, "You know, you never once told me to lose weight." Cyrus looked up, startled. "Why would I?" She laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar even to her. "Most men do." "Well, most men are idiots." The word warmed her more than the fire. Healing does not arrive like salvation. It comes like habit, like safety repeated until fear grows tired of shouting. It is built in quiet kitchens, in shared labor, in the unspoken promise that tomorrow will look enough like today to be trusted. Late in January, Cyrus fell ill. It came on fast, fever, shaking chills, a cough that tore through his chest. He tried to hide it, pushing through chores, until Joe found him slumped against the wall, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. "That's enough," she said, fear sharpening her voice. "You're done." "I can still—" "No!" She took his arm, surprised again by her own strength. "Sit, now." He obeyed. For 3 days, Joe did everything. She fed him broth by the spoonful, changed cold cloths on his brow, kept the fire alive through sleepless nights. She sang softly when the fever worsened, not because she thought it would cure him, but because no one should be alone while hurting. At one point, delirious, Cyrus grabbed her wrist. "Don't go." "I'm here," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." When the fever broke, he slept for nearly 12 hours straight. When he woke, he found her dozing in a chair beside him, head tilted back, exhaustion written into every line of her face. "Joe," he said hoarsely. She stirred. "You're awake. You stayed." "Yes." "What?" She met his eyes, unguarded. "Because you matter." The word settled between them like truth. He reached for her hand, hesitant, almost afraid, and when she did not pull away, his fingers closed around hers. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." She squeezed his hand. "We don't do that here." After that, the distance between them changed, not vanished. They began to share the same side of the fire. Their shoulders brushed without apology. When Cyrus left before dawn, he paused by the door every time, as if to confirm she was real. And Joe, who had spent 30 years being told she was too much, began to feel, impossibly, like she was exactly right. The cabin, once silent, now held laughter sometimes. Quiet, surprised laughter, but real. The mountain still loomed, winter still ruled. But inside, something had taken root, something warm, something dangerous, something that might just be love. Spring returned to Wolf's Ridge like a promise that didn't quite trust itself. Snow retreated in uneven patches, leaving the ground raw and slick. The creek swelled and ran loud with meltwater. The world felt exposed again, no longer sealed safely behind winter's walls. And with that exposure came things Joe had almost forgotten existed. People. The first sign of trouble arrived with a stranger on horseback. He appeared one afternoon while Cyrus was mending a fence line and Joe was hanging laundry. The man wore a city coat ill-suited to mountain travel, his boots polished, his posture practiced. He smiled too easily. "Good afternoon," he called. "I'm looking for a Mr. Cyrus Wolf." Cyrus stepped forward, wary. "That's me." The man dismounted and produced papers. "Territorial survey, railroad expansion. We're mapping potential routes through this region." Joe's stomach tightened. "We're not interested," Cyrus said flatly. The man's smile thinned. "Interest isn't required, Mr. Wolf. Cooperation is." He glanced at Joe then, really looked at her, and something unpleasant flickered across his face. "And you are?" "His housekeeper," Joe said automatically. The old word slipped out before she could stop it. Cyrus stiffened. "My partner." The man raised an eyebrow. "I see." He left after a few more questions, all polite, all invasive. When the sound of hooves finally faded, silence rushed back in, thicker than before. "They're coming closer," Cyrus said. "Yes," Joe replied, "and they don't care. Who's in the way?" The second sign came from the past. Joe's brother arrived unannounced 2 weeks later. Edmund Brennan rode up the ridge with his wife and a guide, his expression caught somewhere between discomfort and judgment as he took in the cabin, the drying racks, the rugged life Joe had built. "Josephine," he said, as if saying her full name might re-establish control. "We heard rumors. I didn't believe them." Joe stood tall on the porch. "You rarely did." Edmund cleared his throat. "The railroad is purchasing land throughout this region. A surveyor mentioned Wolf's Ridge. I thought it prudent to inform you." "Inform us," Cyrus corrected. Stepping beside her, Edmund hesitated at the sight of him. "Of course." Inside over coffee that Edmund drank as if it might poison him, the truth came out. The railroad intended to claim the valley as unregistered land. Cyrus's long occupation meant nothing without proper feelings he had never made, because solitude had seemed safer than bureaucracy. "You should take their offer," Edmund said, folding his hands. "They'll pay compensation, enough to start elsewhere." "This is our home," Joe said quietly. Edmund looked at her, genuinely baffled. "You've always been practical, Josephine. Why cling to a place that will ruin you?" Joe felt the old wound stir, the assumption that she should accept loss as her natural state. "I'm done being practical in ways that only hurt me," she said. That night, after Edmund left, Cyrus sat at the table long after the fire burned low. "I should have registered," he said. "I thought staying invisible would keep trouble away." Joe reached for his hand. Invisible never keeps trouble away. It just makes it arrive later. The pressure mounted quickly after that. Men rode by too often. Traps were disturbed. Fences cut clean through. Once Joe found fresh boot prints outside the washing shed, close enough to feel like a threat. And then there was the letter. It arrived stamped and official, its language cold and final. 30 days to vacate or face removal by court order. Joe read it twice, then folded it carefully. Her hands did not shake. "What do we do?" Cyrus asked. She met his eyes. "We fight, or we lose everything without trying." "With what money?" he asked. "Lawyers cost more than we have." Joe hesitated, then spoke the thought she had been holding back. "I can earn it," he frowned. "How?" "I go to the city, work, sign a contract if I have to, housekeeping, cooking, anything that pays enough." Cyrus surged to his feet. "No, listen to me. No," he repeated, voice rough. "I didn't choose you so the world could take you away again." "You chose me because I was strong," Joe said gently. "Let me use that strength." He stared at her like she'd struck him. "I spent 30 years being told I was unwanted," she continued. "For the first time, I have something worth sacrificing for. Let me." Silence fell, heavy and aching. Finally, Cyrus spoke. "If you go, it will break me." Joe crossed the room and held his face in her hands. "If I stay and we lose this place, it will break you too. Either way hurts. I choose the one that gives us a chance." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. Just when the flower begins to bloom, the storm returns to test its roots. Not to destroy it, but to see whether it can hold. The decision was made before dawn. Joe would leave for the city, not because she was unwanted, but because she was needed. They stood together on the porch as the light crept over the mountains. The cabin behind them held years of work, healing, and love, now balanced on a knife's edge. "This doesn't change anything," Cyrus said hoarsely. "You're my home, wherever you are." Joe smiled through tears. "Then I'll come back, no matter what." The wagon arrived that afternoon. As it pulled away, Joe looked back once at the man who had chosen her when the world laughed, at the life they had built from silence and firelight. 30 days, that was all the railroad had given them. 30 days to prove that love and resolve were stronger than money and power. The railroad did not wait. Neither did Cyrus Wolfe. 3 days after Joe's wagon disappeared down the mountain road, riders appeared at Wolfe's Ridge, 4 men this time, not surveyors, but enforcers. They came openly, rifles slung, boots polished, confidence riding ahead of them like a banner. Cyrus met them at the edge of the clearing. "You've been served notice," the lead man said, unfolding a document without bothering to dismount. 30 days. You're early, Cyrus replied. His voice was calm, but the stillness in his posture was dangerous. We're efficient. The man's eyes flicked to the cabin. Company's willing to sweeten the offer if you cooperate now. 500 for the structures. Another 200 if you're gone by a week's end. Cyrus laughed once, humorless. You think this is about money? It's always about money. Not this time. The man's smile faded. You don't have standing, Wolf. No filings, no witnesses, no leverage. Cyrus took a step forward. I have 12 years of continuous occupation. Trap records, trade receipts, witnesses from 3 valleys who've dealt with me every winter since I came here. The enforcer hesitated. That'll take time to prove. I've got time, Cyrus said. You don't. A second man shifted, hand brushing his rifle. You planning to fight a railroad by yourself? Cyrus's gaze didn't waver. No, I'm planning to outlast you. They left with threats, thinly veiled as advice. That night, Cyrus rode hard to the neighboring valleys. He spoke to trappers, freighters, and traders, the men who had known Wolf's Ridge long before the railroad learned its name. He gathered statements, dates, signatures, anything that could anchor the truth in ink. Days later, the sheriff arrived. He was polite. He was tired. He had been paid. You don't have a case, the sheriff said, not unkindly, not without a lawyer. I'll have one, Cyrus replied. With what money? Cyrus said nothing. The pressure escalated. Fences were cut again. Traps vanished. One morning, Cyrus found a warning nailed to the cabin door, vacate or be removed. He tore it down and burned it in the fire. That same evening, a letter arrived from Jo. Her handwriting was steady, determined. She had found work in Denver, a wealthy household, long hours, hard rules, good pay. She enclosed the first money order and a promise to send more every month. Cyrus sat with the letter until the fire burned low. I'll hold, he said to the empty room. You get back here. I'll hold. The confrontation came at dawn on the 12th day. The railroad men returned, this time with a deputy and a folded court order. Cyrus stood on the porch, rifle resting against the wall behind him, hands empty and visible. You're trespassing, he said. The deputy cleared his throat. Mr. Wolf, I don't want trouble. The order authorizes removal. Cyrus didn't move. Then you'd better read it carefully. The deputy frowned, unfolding the paper. His eyes scanned the lines, then narrowed. He looked up. This is conditional. Read the addendum. The deputy did. Slowly, his expression changed. Continuous occupation clause, Cyrus said. If contested with affidavits from regional witnesses, removal is stayed pending hearing. The lead enforcer swore under his breath. This is bullshit. It's law, the deputy replied, and it buys time. How much? One of the men snapped. Long enough, the deputy said, folding the paper. You'll have to take this to court. They left angry, defeated, for now. Cyrus watched until the riders vanished into the trees. Only then did his hands begin to shake. True strength isn't about violence. It's about standing still when the world demands you move. It's about placing yourself between what you love and what would destroy it, and refusing to step aside. That night, Cyrus wrote Jo back. He told her the truth, the danger, the small victory, the time they'd won. He did not tell her how empty the cabin felt without her. Outside, the mountains held their silence. Inside, hope, thin, stubborn, and unyielding, refused to die. The cabin learned Jo's absence. The the way a body learns a missing limb, not all at once, but in moments. In the extra cup Cyrus poured each morning before remembering there was no one to hand it to, in the way the fire burned too quietly at night, in the silence that no longer felt chosen, only endured. Weeks passed, snowmelt gave way to early summer rain, the valley stayed green, stubbornly alive, as if refusing to acknowledge the danger pressing in from beyond the ridges. Cyrus worked harder than ever, repairing fences, documenting every improvement, writing names and dates into a ledger Joe had started months before. He spoke to the cabin sometimes. "She'll be back," he said once, aloud, as if the walls needed convincing. "She always keeps her word." Letters came every week. Joe wrote of exhaustion, of strict employers, of hands roughened by endless labor. But beneath every line was resolve. Money orders arrived with the letters, small victories folded into envelopes. Each one bought time, each one carried her absence like weight. One evening, after a particularly long day, Cyrus sat at the table and unfolded her latest letter. At the bottom, she had written, "This isn't exile, it's purpose. Don't let anyone take what we built. I'm still there with you, just at a distance." He pressed the paper to his forehead and breathed. The railroad returned twice more. Each time they found Cyrus ready. Papers organized, witnesses named, the law slow, reluctant, but no longer entirely on their side. "You're stubborn," one man said bitterly. "So is my wife," Cyrus replied. That night, the fire burned brighter. Summer deepened, the mountains softened, the waiting stretched thin. And then one afternoon, a wagon appeared at the edge of the clearing. Cyrus froze. The driver reined in. Someone climbed down. Joe stood there, thinner, tired, eyes bright with something fierce and unbroken. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Cyrus crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She held him just as tightly, burying her face against his chest as if confirming he was real. "I'm home," she whispered. He kissed her hair. "You never left." They sat together that evening on the porch, the cabin glowing behind them, the future still uncertain, but no longer empty. The fight was not over. Court dates loomed. The railroad would return. Money would always be tight. But Joe was back, and the world felt manageable again. Home is not the absence of struggle. It is the place you return to when struggle has taken its toll. It is the arms that wait, the light left burning, the promise that no distance can erase what was chosen with intention. Joe rested her head on Cyrus's shoulder. "Whatever happens next," she said, "we face it here," he nodded. "Together." The mountains held their breath. The law moved slowly, and love, quiet, stubborn, and unyielding, refused to let go. Every time a story like this finds its way to you, it crosses more than distance. It crosses doubt. It crosses loneliness. It crosses the quiet fear of being told you are too much, too late, or not wanted at all. Joe was 30. She was heavy. She was mocked and dismissed by a world that measured worth in narrow terms. And yet, in a silent cabin high in the mountains, she was chosen, not despite who she was, but because of it. Stories like this exist because people like you exist. People who still believe that love is not reserved for the flawless, the young, or the easy. That home is not something you earn by fitting in, but something you build by standing firm. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? And if any part of Joe's journey felt familiar, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you were the wrong choice, stay with me. The next story will be waiting for you.